welcome. This I believe is our third town hall meeting to discuss our partnership and the possible acquisition of the former Calvary United Methodist Church building. I'm so glad that you're here, because the best way to enter into a partnership and the best way to make decisions is to make informed decisions. And so I really appreciate you taking this time to become better informed about the things that we have found out, the things that we have learned, so that together we can make a better decision, a more informed decision, and ultimately that we can introduce people to Jesus. And so thank you so much for being here. It's Palm Sunday evening. And so on the day that we commemorate welcoming Jesus, the welcome of Jesus into Jerusalem, we tonight welcome Jesus into our presence. We welcome the Holy Spirit into our presence, into our virtual meeting space. And so let's pray together. God, we give you thanks for the gift of this night. And God, I praise you for your grace that is available to us all the time, every time. We give you thanks, God, for the gift that tonight is, for your presence that is abundantly clear. And so, God, would you guide our time? We welcome you in the same way that you were welcomed into Jerusalem all those years ago. We welcome you in the same way, declaring your greatness and declaring who you are. Make your presence known in this virtual space tonight, that we could clearly hear your voice and follow your guidance. We give you thanks and praise in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
We have a few things to update you on. We did get our inspection back, and we've got some information to share about all of that. And so we're gonna jump right into it. So I'll pass it over to Kathy.
Okay, so one of the things that we've learned is that the inspection report provided a lot of detailed information, but it still comes with some guesses of information as far as what professionals in specific areas might actually charge for the cost of some of the work. So here's what we know. The inspection report is very thorough, 98 pages long, and we're happy to have that available if that's something that you want to thumb through or read through. It's our information, and so you certainly may look at it. There were 3 areas of excuse me, immediate concern that we understand exist in the inspection. So those 3 areas are the roof, the electrical panels and systems, and the potential for hazardous materials. And when we were having the report interpreted to us, we understand that the guess of what it might cost to approach these immediate concerns could be between $450,000 to $500,000. Now that's still a guess piece of information, and so together, the councils, the ULC from Camp Hill and the council from Grace, determined that a faithful next step would be to ask a roofing professional to create an honest to goodness bid and timeline on what it would cost to stabilize the roof. The second decision was to have an honest bid from an electrician on what would it cost to address the electrical panels and systems. And then, and both of those are bids that we would be able to receive without charge, because these would be bids for jobs. And then the other was to get a bid on what it would cost to examine the potential hazardous materials. And those potential hazardous materials are buildings of this age likely have asbestos tiling and likely have asbestos around pipes. And what we know is that none of the asbestos at this time is dangerous. None of it is, there's a term that they use, friable, that's it, thank you. That there's not any asbestos that we understand to be friable at this point, but that would be a piece that could potentially happen. And so where we are is discovering more specifically the guess of 450 to 500,000. That's a ballpark guess. Let's get a handle on what it really costs before we come back to you with any requests moving forward. So this does not cost either church anything to collect this information, but follows through with a little bit more information gathering so that as churches, we can make the best decision, the most well-informed decisions. So that's what we know right now. But the other piece, I think that this was something yesterday the pastors and I were talking about. So pastors Anna and Jason and I, when hearing about things like the roof, the electrical panels and systems, the hazardous materials, that always raises concerns about the safety potentially of those who might currently be in or out of the building. And what we know is that the former Calvary Church members were maintaining the building and had done capital improvements up until the time when they discerned to close as a church. And they also, 2 pastors ago, were being served by Lou Parks, who is the chairperson of the conference insurance team on behalf of the conference trustees. And so I know that Pastor Lou has high integrity and would not have a building be in a position that insurability would be questionable. And if safety is an immediate concern, that would be something that the insurability would have something to speak into. And so that's just kind of a side piece when trying for me, to best understand what all of this information means. We need more details. And it doesn't sound like there's immediate, urgent, in this moment concern. Like I think about Little Steps that has their kiddos there in the daycare. Like we know the building is insured. We know that that if there were an insurability concern because of safety, the insurance company will point that out. Pastor Anna.
Yeah, so just to add to that, the conference trustees have also been given a copy of this report, and they currently are the owners of the building. And so, they are aware of some of the most urgent needs. There are a number of small things that can be attended to very quickly that they will be following up on with the current custodian of the building. And so we feel very good about their capacity to start working on some of these things now. And, as Kathy mentioned, we don't have any reason to believe that the roof is going to fall in. It just needs to be repaired. There are some parts of it were repaired about 3 years ago. And so we're curious to find out. That was done at a very reasonable cost 3 years ago. We're eager to find out if the same costs will come back in the quote, particularly in regard to the slate, or if we might find out that the slate roofing costs have gone up exorbitantly over the last few years, and that's one of the questions that we need to have answered. Yeah, so we recognize that I think many of us wish that we were a little further in this process at this point, that we wish we were at a point where we could make a final decision. But we do think that we are doing all of the due diligence steps that are faithful. I think Kathy mentioned that the next steps that the council agreed to were unanimous, and I think that speaks volumes about people's desire to, take all of this information that we have into careful consideration, but also to gather as much information as possible so that we can be faithful. And so we're in a place where we need a few more weeks, to get a little bit more information to make a final decision. In the meantime, Frank Marshall, who I hope you don't mind me calling you out, is on this call. He is an architect in the Camp Hill congregation, and he has also been working on some potential plans for adding a handicap accessible entrance to the building into the fellowship hall area. And so, we've been exploring some of those possibilities in terms of how to renovate the building such that it would be the most useful for the types of ministry visions that we have. And I'm very grateful to Frank for his willingness to, I think we all are, participate in that. So, we're continuing to explore all of the different paths, to see where they might lead. I'm wondering if any of the members of the councils have anything, or Frank, have anything that they might like to add to what we have shared already.
I could just listening to the three areas of concern. I know we at the Camp Hill United Methodist Church, I was on the trustees, and we had asbestos floor in the education wing. And in that case, we chose to encapsulate the tile floor, and we used a product called Shonox, which is like a plaster that goes down over the tile. So that's another option for not remediating. And then for slate, there's the option of going with a plastic slate called Echo slate that might be cheaper. I don't know. You'd have to look into the pricing, but it looks like slate for the most part, I would think. But it might be another worth one to get a bid on, to compare. And what was the other one? Electrical. I can't speak to that one too much. So,
Thank you, Frank. That's not something that we had taken into consideration, the eco plastic option. So when we talk to the contracting firm this week, we'll ask them about that specifically. Thank you for that.
I might also add that the report details not just the slate roof, but also the rubber roof that exists over the flat part of the, I guess, the newer addition, if you will. And they had indicated in the report that the rubber roof is pretty close to end of life, that it's shrunk and the seams are opening up, and there is some evidence of some water damage. So that is another element, I guess, of the whole roof concern.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Anyone else from the councils? Anything to add? Trying to scan the pages here. Okay,
I just, when Kathy was starting off and she was saying there were some unknowns, having drawn up the existing floor plan, they call those unforeseen conditions. And so I was thinking there are some unforeseen conditions, like if we're talking about putting a handicapped path through, we would have to make sure we can structurally, sort of make those spans. It's about a 10-foot span. And then also whether the bellows for the organ is actually, if the blower motor is actually in the basement like it showed, but it sounded like we were going to maybe, the organ might be going somewhere else at some point. And so all those things, yeah. But that's it.
we have been trying to get some information on how to sell the organ, and I'm not actually 100% sure where that stands. It's been hard to get replies from organ companies because they know that there's only like 2 of them, so they know that they can make us wait. So yeah, so we're that's another path we're exploring as well. Yeah. I mean, in sort of good news, if the renovation part of the bottom level that Frank has been looking at, we do know that the tile down there is not asbestos. So that was like a small yay in amongst all of the other large pieces of discernment that we're sifting through. So at this point, if there's nothing else from the councils, we do want to open it up to hear your questions. We have been trying to keep up with our FAQ page. I'm sure there are some that we haven't gotten to yet, but we continue to work on that weekly. So yes, at this point, what questions do you have about where we are in the process, friends?
I would just like to ask, are you looking for multiple bids on so that there's a little competition in there?
Yes, so the GEM group will garner, I think, at least 2 or 3 bids for each area of renovation. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, great question. Thank you.
And just to remind everyone, the GEM group is the group that assisted us in identifying the inspection company that we ended up using. And so they're partners along in this.
Yeah, but we have paid them nothing. At this point, they're just doing this out of the goodness of their hearts. And, in case there might be work for them down the line, maybe. So yeah, we have paid the inspector though. So don't think that we're, not, fulfilling our contracts or anything like that. Other questions?
Anna, this is John.
Yeah.
I have a question. I don't know what that electrical panel system means. Does that include HVAC systems?
So I think my everybody who has the report can help with this a little bit. This is not my area of expertise, but I believe the main concern with the electrical system are specifically some electrical panels that are of an old code. So that's what they would first want to look at, and they have a specific name that I think Kathy's looking up right now. There is a question mark with HVAC system in the sense that when they went to turn the heat on, I believe in the sanctuary, the thermostat did not kick the heat on. So they're not 100% sure what part of the system that might be impacting. But yeah, Kathy, you want to?
Have they had an HVAC company look at that?
No, just the inspector.
I would suggest you do that. They will look at it for free, just to make sure that things are right, because that can be a very big expense, as you know.
Yeah, so I would be fine with us adding that to the list of contractors we asked Jem to source for us. I'm seeing some nodding heads, so I think we'll do that this week as well. Thanks for that heads up, John.
I know that the report did indicate that the main condenser unit that's on the roof, not the air handler, but the condenser unit was about 34 years old, which is pretty old for a condenser unit. The electrical concerns that we've been talking about so far really are about electrical distribution in the church. There are a number of service panels. There's at least one that is still fused rather than circuit breakers. And so that's quite old. But there are a number of circuit breaker panels. I believe there's Zimco brand that are out of spec because of their age, I guess, and would probably need to be replaced. There's also a shortage of circuits in some of the offices where some additional outlets are currently kind of overloaded, and they would need to add some additional outlets throughout the church. And there's also an issue with grounding. Many of the outlets throughout the church don't have a bare a third prong, if you will, ground, and that could be corrected by a system-wide GFCI type of apparatus.
Dave, was that just from the top of your head?
Well, I read the report.
So I opened the report and to pull out those very specific details that were still in your head. I'm pleased, thank you. Yeah, that hit everything that was highlighted.
I have a question.
That's you.
And I pondered asking this, and I might be out of line. Based on the information you've received and what appears to be a large cost, has there been any discussion about foregoing this approach and spending less money on another facility somewhere in the West Shore to serve the people?
Yeah, there are a lot.
Yeah, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, that's not out of line at all. That's not an out of line question at all. Yes, that has been brought up. This is actually in the same spirit as the question that appears in the chat. Yes, so we are actually, one of the main things that we want to communicate tonight is that if, and we're still using if language, if this is not the resource that we need in order to be in partnership together, that's okay. The partnership is still together. The partnership never depended on the Calvary building, and it still doesn't. So the vision that the team came to was that people need to hear about Jesus. And so we think we can do that. We think we can do that effectively together. That remains no matter what. And so I think, Steve, everything's on the table as far as a different facility as far as what does it look like to do this in our own facilities? And thirdly, of course, what does it look like to be surprised by some of the things that we might learn from our numbers? What does it look like to do in the Calvary facility? So that question is not out of line at all. It's actually a great question to be able to communicate that if this building project we discern that that's not the path that we want to go down, it's a great opening to say, well, what do we do? How do we share Jesus with our communities, and how do we do that together and effectively? So I think it's a great question, because no matter what, we've identified some needs that are in this community, and those needs will not go away just because we say, well, we don't think that the Calvary building is right at this time. Those needs are still there.
And I would hope they don't go away. The vision that those three women put out there last month was outstanding. And I came away from that meeting excited that possibility of doing things that they suggested. And there are other ways to do it, you're correct. But it definitely has to be done in some way.
Well, take some credit. You're correct. You're the one who said.
Well, you got the big school sitting up there too, the former middle school that conceivably has extra room for doing ministry out of that building also. So maybe you've looked at that too. All right, I say no more.
No, thank you, Steve. Yeah, that building is under contract to be developed into condos, and is actually was one of our pieces of excitement in the Calvary building, because it's right across the street. We thought, wow, what a great opportunity to be able to minister to all these people who are newly going to be moving into the neighborhood. We understand that construction process is taking quite a long time, so we have no idea what the timeline on that of people actually arriving there would be. But yeah, it's a great question. And I mean, just this week, Nancy Leroy and Bill Umberger sent through a rental lease opportunity in the West Shore Plaza that they had been driving by and noticed. So we've been doing some research on that, trying to think through that option, and and thinking through all the different pieces of the vision that the vision team laid out last time. What pieces of those vision might work in a different space like that? What pieces of them would not? How do we then either reshape the vision or reshape the space? So yeah, and just yesterday we had a flicker of an idea of what would happen if we bought a house on Market Street, in Lemoyne. Just a little flicker of I wonder. Yeah, so all those options are still on the table, and part of, as I just mentioned, part of what was so exciting about that particular building, and I don't know if Carrie Ann is on this call or not, I haven't seen her face yet, but she articulated this really beautifully in our meeting on Thursday, was actually the actual physical location of the building, because the students from Washington Heights walk straight by it every single day, right? And there are already Washington Heights kids that come to that building for assistance with their schoolwork, even now, so it really is, it's very centrally located in Lemoyne, and so some of the parts of our vision, I think Lowell asked about, what are we planning to do with this building, right? I want to encourage you to, Lowell, if you haven't gotten to yet, and anyone else, as Steve mentioned, watch the video of the last town hall, and you'll hear the vision team members sharing 4 different facets of the vision for what we would hope would happen in that space, what we believe God is calling us to. And just real briefly, one of those is ministry with the Washington Heights elementary kids and families. The second one is partnering with the Little Steps daycare that's already in the building. We know that low cost, excellent childcare is a deep need in Lemoyne in particular. So partnering with them as they grow their ministry and their work in the community. Developing community-based food partnerships. So, you know, we're Methodist, we do food, right? and so does Lemoyne. Like, Lemoyne doesn't actually have a community gathering space for eating together. And so other than the market, which could be an amazing partner. And so, yeah, looking at food truck commissary space and partnering with New Hope Ministries to offer cooking classes and developing pop-up restaurants to meet the need of the community as COVID has created a real problem for restaurants in the area. There are a number that are closing, including a really good one in Lemoyne. And so, and then the fourth aspect of the vision was the concept of being a bridge, right? Like being a bridge between our two churches, being a bridge between two communities, being a bridge from the church to the community and back and forth, you know, so this bigger bridging concept, you know, and the fact that the Calvary building is just like pretty much halfway between Grace and Chum is just like very cool, you know? So there's all of those visions for this space, but like so many folks have mentioned tonight, you know, like we believe God is much bigger than, you know, one idea. So so we want to stay open, you know, to how those visions might play out in a variety of ways. Other questions?
I have a question for Frank. Frank, do you anticipate labor industry needing to get involved in the renovation of this building in any way? I think if you do a handicap ramp, they would have to approve that. Is that correct?
Yes, and I actually already spoke to labor and industry, and so since the borough of Lemoyne, they did something where they opted to have their own code reviewer, so they use Ritu Associates, and there's a gentleman, they gave me his name. I haven't called him yet, but I did speak to labor and industry. They'll give you general preliminary opinions on the design. So I did go over it with him. And so, yes, it will have to go through code review for International Building Code. And that would be done by Ritu Associates, a person there, which I think they're out of you. Yeah.
Do you anticipate anything other than the addition of the handicap ramp as being something that they would have to be involved in?
Well, so one of the goals was to protect the children in the preschool side and for safe sanctuaries. So we're almost talking about putting a divider right down through the middle of the basement that would have a basically a secure door that I was proposing would swing away from the preschool. Basically, the adults couldn't voluntarily just go into the preschool. And so with that happening, the bathrooms right now are sort of oriented towards the preschool, and I'm proposing that you sort of flip the entrance to those bathrooms so that now they're accessible from the fellowship side. And then that kind of eliminates one of the, the access for the preschool, but the preschool already has several little small bathrooms in each of their rooms. So I was proposing sort of a single use bathroom between two of the preschool rooms so they could actually share a door into that single bathroom, which would have a single toilet. And then every preschool room would then have a toilet available so they wouldn't have to leave the room, when the teacher is in the room. So that would hopefully be a minimal, amount of additional work there, as opposed to putting a whole gang toilet on both sides of that dividing wall or something.
Does the conference have any responsibility, any of the cost, the possible cost of doing all this work?
So Steve, that's a good question. I would say the conference doesn't have responsibility. However, we have had some conversations with different aspects of the annual conference who have offered funding. But offering funding is, when you look at what's on the table right now, the conference won't cover that in its entirety. But I've also been really pleasantly surprised by what is potentially available to us.
Yeah, so Kathy is not just talking about like $1,000, right? Like, a lot of times the conference will offer small grants of, $500 or $1,000 for work in various congregations, but she's talking about much larger sums of money, some of which might come from the sale of the Calvary Parsonage, some of which might come from the Equipping Vital Congregations office that just gave the Journey Church in Harrisburg $50,000 to renovate their basement to create community classrooms. So that's the kind of money that we're talking about from the conference. Yes, so what we've been told in that regard is that we need to get costs, and then we need to go back to the various entities in the conference and tell them, this is what it's going to cost us to do this. This is what we can feasibly contribute as congregations, and this is what we're asking from you. And see what they say. The worst they can say is no, or they're not going to say no. They might give us less than we asked for, but they're not going to say no. Yeah, so that's part of the work that our councils are about to do as well. We didn't mention that yet. Both of our councils are going back to do their individual work of determining what we really do have the capacity financially, they believe, to contribute from each congregation. And they're going to be doing work on what the proportional responsibility is between the two churches as well. And that work would need to be done even if we don't get the building, because there will be some costs programmatically associated with anything that we decided to do together, and that's good work for us to chew on.
Would there be any government grants available, like from the Americans with Disability Act, or situations like that? I'm not sure of at all, but just wondering.
So I think that there could be asks made. My experience is that churches have had a hard time receiving those types of grants, but I sometimes get to be surprised by people who say yes when I thought they might just flatly say no.
In the past, we've discussed the fact that the conference was trying to get us to make a decision a lot earlier than we had originally hoped to do. What's the status on that problem?
So, Anne, that's another very helpful question. I think that we believe we can still make a determination with that same time frame, and if not, I don't think that we would make a decision that we weren't comfortable making due to insufficient time. That if we would start to hit up against the timeline that the conference trustees would like for us to follow, I think that we would first need to have a conversation with them about what that means as far as our making a decision. We don't want to make it too fast or too slow.
In other words, they're still asking for a mid-May decision.
They have not changed that, but they also know where we are in our work at this point. They just received the building inspection. We figure since it's their building, they should have a copy of it. And I don't know that we've updated them on our next step of getting bid information. because that was just on Thursday evening determined. So we can update the conference trustees on that. Honestly, I think that the conference trustees have two concerns. One of them is they want to make sure that we're doing our due diligence and not dawdling. The second is if we choose to not receive the building, they want to be able to put it back on the market, and they want to have as much summertime as possible. And so if we choose to not receive the building, we do want to be able to discern that and communicate that so that the conference trustees can care for the building in the way that they need to. And does that answer your question? So I've been trying to also scroll through. I don't see any electronic hands raised, but I was trying to scroll through to see if any of you were also waving your hands physically so that you could get our attention. And I don't want for us to miss anybody.
Kathy, this is Lowell Starling.
Yes.
You mentioned the 98-page report and 3 items that are guesstimates right now in the 450 to 500,000. What is there any estimate on what the other 97 pages of this report are going to cost? Or is that all the rest of it noise level and those are the big hitters?
So those were the big pieces. And I don't know that I'm equipped to respond to the other aspects. There are some things that were detailed that are quick and easy maintenance pieces that the conference trustees have immediately put their attention to. But I'm not sure about the others. Pastor Anna or Pastor Jason, do you have a good sense of that?
I think the only way I know how to respond to that, even remotely faithfully, is to say that when we asked the GEM group rep kind of what amount of money he thought would be useful upfront, to kind of like get this building into good shape, he gave us the $450,000 to $500,000 number, just as a ballpark, right? So I'm not able to tell you exactly how many of the things in the report that covers, but he did feel that amount would get us to a pretty good place. So yeah. I think we will definitely know more when those bids come in. Yeah, Dave.
The way I guess the way I think about it is that, those items, those 3 items that we've talked about are kind of the big ticket items, the items that I would think could potentially be showstoppers. There were a number of other smaller, now the report itself doesn't really put any dollar figures on any of this stuff. It wasn't in their scope to do that. They recommend over and over again that we contact a contractor to get a little bit of a better idea on current prices. But I do recall, for example, there's an outside set of concrete steps on the alley side of the church that, based on what they're shown in the report, look like they would need to be removed and replaced. But again, those are things that cost, maybe I'm guessing $10,000. They're not showstoppers. Things like the potential for major renovation on the roof, electrical system, hazardous materials, those are things that could potentially run into the kind of money that I guess we've been talking about. And so those are the things that I think that the pastors and the councils wanted to kind of put a little ground truth to, and determine if this sort of a back of napkin estimate that our consultant has thrown out there to see if there's truth to that. Because I think at that point that if we can validate that or come up with a better number, we're in a better position to sit down as two congregations and say, can we afford this? Is this the best way to accomplish the ministry that we're talking about? Or is there a more cost-effective way? And we've talked about, maybe this building isn't the most cost-effective way. But we won't really be to that point until we can put a little ground truth to the numbers, I think.
Yeah, and just a point of clarification, as I understood the consultant to say, we don't have to spend that money up front, right? And part of what the due diligence and details are going to help us with is the timing around that over a 1, 2, 3 year period is what I thought I heard, right? It's not like all of those 3 things have to be fixed and remediated day one, right? And part of our desire is to get additional details to understand what the plan would be over, I'll say 3 to 5 years. I don't know, maybe it's shorter than that. That's how I understood it.
See, I didn't recall, I recalled them as being something that would need to be an upfront kind of thing. I mean, obviously, keeping the rain out is going to be something pretty important. And they did notice a number of areas where there were, at least in the past, some active leaks. I guess things were dry when they inspected it. They couldn't tell whether some of the staining on the sheeting underneath the roofs was active or not, I guess. The electrical system is a potential fire hazard in some of these cases, so some of that would need to be addressed pretty early.
So my hearing was that it was a both and, that some of the matters that are more urgent are urgent now, and some of them might be spreadable over time, but that could only be known by a specialist in those areas. Does that sound familiar to anybody?
For sure. And there, alongside of that, there are options even with the roof. Like actually around about right now, there's a patch going into the roof to deal with a hole where part of the HVAC system was. And that's work that the conference trustees are doing. It's a temporary measure, but it's going to keep the rain out for now, right? So some of it is assessing, how much of it really needs a permanent, 20 to 30 year fix right now, and how much of it we might feel we can patch or, put in a temporary measure and delay depending on the phasing that would be realistic.
This is Lowell Starling again. Pastor Jason, at the February town hall, you made a statement about, as I recall, to the effect that the building was capable of doing ministry now, but not, quote, our ministry, unquote. Does anybody have any feel at this point for what the costs are of equipping it to do, quote, our ministry, unquote? Because that's a different animal than meeting code and safety and keeping the rain out. That's a whole different category of it.
Yeah, I think that is definitely something to keep in mind, that we do want to make clear that this is the electrical system, the roof, and hazardous materials and things like that. That's where that number comes from. That does not take into account taking the pews out of the sanctuary in order to make it into a more community-friendly space. So you're right, Lowell, that would be additional. That's something else. That's a completely different discussion.
Thank you.
So I'm hearing that we're talking about whether it's 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, investing possibly $500,000, $500,000 into a 100-year-old building. We're also talking about, I think I've heard people say that we need to change the look of it from being a church building to another type of building. Given the fact that this could potentially be a $500,000 investment, have we looked at properties that cost $500,000 that are not church buildings, but might work better for the program that is being visioned?
That is, we have, kind of like explored the ideas, and we've been keeping our eyes open. We have not contacted a realtor or to look in depth. And part of that is, honestly, we hadn't considered, taking on another building for another couple of years anyway, until we found out that this building was going to be sold. And so a lot of our discerning, has been around this particular building, partly because of the time frame that we're in. If we decide that this isn't the right resource, I think that's exactly the right thing to do, Nancy. There are a number of different areas of ministry and specific needs that we're looking for. So like one of the things that's attractive about this building is that it does actually have a very functional kitchen. And so part of our vision, in terms of pop-up restaurants, that kind of idea, it's a good space for that. It has the kitchen, it has the space for the daycare, and it has, the sanctuary is quite large. And if the pews were removed, it would have a very large community space that could be used for camps and performances and all kinds of community gatherings. And so it's challenging, I think, to find a building that has so many multifaceted space uses. Yeah, I mean, we may find buildings that have, or spaces that have use in one of those areas, but not the others. I think that's highly likely. So it is attractive, to consider, might we be able to do it all, in one place. As far as the external look of the building, I don't recall anyone on the vision team having a concern about that. The sense, I think, has been that generally speaking, people don't have an issue with God. People often do have an issue with the institutional church. But I mean, even with the Fresh Expressions work we've done at CHUM, I've never experienced people having a struggle actually entering into a church building, as long as what they find when they get in there is not what they expected, perhaps, right? So I don't, in terms of like reshaping the external look of the building, that has not been part of our discussion really, or a part of our concern. I think the word would get out pretty quickly that it's not a typical church anymore. But that people maybe still find God there if we decided to go that route. But if not, like we said, I think there are all kinds of opportunities out there that we could explore together that would be really exciting.
But in talking to the folks for the dinner at CHUM last week when they were up at the Spring Fling in Camp Hill, they specifically said they did not want to use the church building for their ministry. So
yep, and that is one model. That's one model. And yeah, so for those of you who are a bit unclear about what we're talking about, so CHUM has just launched a dinner church. It's currently a drive-through dinner church, and there's an online social media community component to it, that people can log in and share in community online because of where we've been with COVID, right? And it was an incredibly successful launch. I think they had 91 meals dispersed, yeah, and they were all picked up. And so, but that is the very beginning of that ministry. They also have a vision of expanding it so that there's not just one dinner church, but there are many dinner churches in the area. And they are very aware of what's happening, you know, in Lemoyne and the conversations that were in there. So there's lots of room for exploration on that front. John, I see your hand. John's
You hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I just share a couple of thoughts. I attended the last Zoom meeting, and the three visions that were outlined, okay, for my impression is that if you took a look at all three of those visions, you were really trying to find different ways to get people into the Calvary United Methodist Church, whether it's expanding the daycare, turning it into a grub hub, somehow getting the Eisenhower kids to come over, whatever. All of these things, I got the impression were to try to get people into the church, okay, as a starter. But today it sounds like we need to also consider now and there's a lot of, because of its location, as you mentioned, Anna, okay, there's some advantages there. But so what part, I think we have to consider maybe at some point in time, what part of the partnership or the shared ministry between Camp Hill and Grace United Methodist Church is not dependent upon the building and its location. The other thing is the latest plan says, well, we can do something in 2021, 2022, 2023. Maybe there's some things we can do in 2021. Maybe there's some things we can do to kick off this partnership and implement a little bit of the visions that we had developed without doing all the stuff we talked about today. I mean, you know, are there some things that we could do in the short term here, or do we need to fix everything in the church before we can do anything? I just, you know, that was my impression for the last session. We were trying to get many different thoughts and ways to get people into this church, okay? But now we've got to maybe consider, and we've talked about it tonight, about, you know, are there some portions of that partnership and vision that we can do without that building or without that location? That's just my summary of what I think. So
yeah,
that's it.
Thanks, John. Yeah. So two thoughts about that. So the first one is I'm not sure the vision is about bringing people into the church as like into the building as a church. I think the idea is more of that there's a building that can become a hub in the community for bringing people together, for bridging divides, where we pray that people will experience God's presence. And there are a number of facets of community activity and need that we've identified in that area that kind of coalesce around that space, right? So it's a little slightly different in my head anyway. I'm sure other vision team folks can jump in, but I'm so glad that you mentioned that there are things that we can do in the interim, because on Tuesday we are having our second community impact summer planning meeting. And there are members of Grace Church and Camp Hill UMC on that team. There are 2 new members of Grace UMC who are joining that team on Tuesday. I'm so excited to meet them. I don't know if they're on this call tonight, but I hope they are. They're not? Okay, then I get to meet them on Tuesday. Yeah, so that will involve 39 service projects all across our community over the summer that Grace and Camp Hill folks can participate in together to be making a difference in this partnership already. So yeah, there are a lot of things that we can do better together in the meantime.
Okay.
So I'm seeing that we're coming up, we've passed our hour, right? So are there any last urgent questions that we don't want to miss anyone's? We don't have the next town hall scheduled yet. We feel like we jumped the gun a little bit on setting this date, thinking that we would have more information than we do. And so I think we're probably going to wait until we get a little bit more information from the construction management folks before we set the next date, just so that we're sure we have good info for you. But in the meantime, you know, we certainly can continue to do our prayer walking in Lemoyne. We encourage you to do that, to pray a circle around the building, to pray down the streets of Lemoyne. Yeah, that is, and to let us know what appears to you in your prayer, you know, what you hear, what you see, what visions you're having. We really want to know. Yeah, Jason, you want to talk through a couple other next steps while I scan the crowd here to see if there's any hands up?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I would be remiss if I didn't mention how pleased I am at the entrepreneurial spirit and the willingness to pivot with us as we continue this. And so please continue to do that. Please pray over and discuss with vision team members the things that you're experiencing. And if there needs to be a pivot as far as the building goes, I loved what I heard tonight, you know, that we're in ministry together. And so please continue to do that, and please make it known that you want the vision team members to take into consideration what you are hearing from God as well. I think there was a hand from Marcia Nesbitt.
Hi, thank you. Just before we go, I read in the minutes from the Unified Leadership Council that there is a new committee that has been formed for Camp Hill United Methodist regarding debt reduction. And I didn't know if someone could just speak briefly about that.
Yeah, thank you for asking about that, Marcia. Following Easter, which is next week already, the team's going to come together and have a first conversation to really do some serious discerning around how can we intentionally make our way to zero debt. So it's going to be real focused on what's a realistic timeline and how can we care for reasonably getting out from underneath the debt that we've had for too long.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'd like to make another suggestion, comment. Do either one of you pastors know the pastor at St. John's United Methodist Church in Williamsport, in the western end of Williamsport?
Lenore Hosier.
You do?
Yeah, we all do.
So St. John's took over another Methodist church, was just around the corner, that I grew up in. And that church has now become a community center. And it was not a new church that they took. It was called Newberry United Methodist Church. So he might have some suggestions or ideas of what happened and who took the other church and what they did. So just another thought.
the two churches merged together.
They did?
They merged together. And so when churches merge, the newly merged church retain all of the liabilities and all of the assets of both former churches. And so St. John's and Newbury became St. John's Newbury, and they're in the St. John's building, and then, or right, the St. John's building, and then the former building is their WEC Center. What is that, West End Community Center?
I'm not sure what it's called.
Yeah, I
just
know
realized-
it's the WEC Center, but I don't know that I know what WEC stands for in my head.
Okay,
Yeah.
just so you're aware of it.
Yeah, but that's a good point to note. Thanks, Steve.
You're welcome.
Just one last thing, Jason, the person that got the old fire station across the street from the church, is that owned by him or is that leased?
It is owned. The former Lemoyne Fire Department was for sale for several years and was purchased last year. Yes, we want you to continue to have this entrepreneurial spirit, this willingness to pivot, this willingness to learn some more, this willingness to be open to what God is doing. And so we ask that you continue to pray over and discuss with Vision team members how we can come alongside of Washington Heights Elementary students, how we can work together with Little Steps Daycare to provide that much needed need for quality daycare, in quality and affordable daycare in the Lemoyne area. Pray about developing community partnerships, community-based food-related partnerships, developing this vision of the bridge. Thank you so much for your spirit on all of this. We're just gonna see. We're gonna see what is next. We're gonna try to take the next faithful step. The churches who make it in the best way possible out of this crisis will make it because we're well prepared to be in ministry in whatever newness comes. And so I am confident that both of our churches will be those churches who will be prepared to be in ministry for whatever the next iteration is. I would like to ask if Kim Bedford would close us in prayer this evening.
Sure. Thanks, Pastor Jason. Let us bow our heads. Heavenly Father, thank you. Thank you for those who showed up tonight with passion and energy and care and questions and ideas and all the things they brought tonight. Thank you for whatever you're doing between our churches in this partnership. And we look forward to continuing to discern, envision, and throw ideas out there, whether it involves a church and a building or just ministry together. We ask you to guide us, guide our thoughts, help lead us to wherever you're leading us at this time. And we ask you to be with us as we enter Holy Week this week with great anticipation for Easter Sunday. Please guide us and keep us safe as we go on our way. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Everyone, go in peace tonight, and we'll see you on Easter Sunday and Good Friday and Maundy Thursday.
See ya.
So take good care.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.